Welcome to the Content Podcast, Conversations with Silicon Valley's Creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates.
Hi, this is Esther.
Today we talk with Esther Young. She's a contributing writer to Content Magazine and a songwriter. Hey Esther, how you doing? This is Daniel.
I'm doing good. Hi, Daniel.
Cool. I'm glad that we get to talk to each other. Thank you very much for taking time. And I do have a couple questions I want to do. First, I want to thank you for contributing to Content Magazine for the last, how long? It's been a couple years at least, right?
Yeah, I think it's been at least 2 years at this point, because when I started, I was still in school.
Yeah. And you were graduating from Santa Clara University, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and what was your major there?
I majored in English, and I majored in music, and just to make my parents happy, I also minored in international business.
And are they happy?
I think so. Yeah. I think that there are certain boxes you're supposed to check off, like moving out and getting a job and showing you know how to save your money. And so I think that at least in those areas, I've made them satisfied. Yeah.
I guess that's the tough thing, right? Is when are we really responsible for someone else's happiness?
That is such a good question. And I'm learning now that I'm not responsible for anyone's happiness. But then on the other hand, it's like how far, or I should ask myself, how far can I go to show them my gratitude? So
that is the kind of difficult thing in life, is where, we all do kind of stand alone and responsible for ourselves, but yet then we are, as we can currently see, we are still so super connected, right?
Yeah.
The one thing I just wanted to start out with this conversation was, you're a very kind of quiet person, and you kind of remind me of that kind of phrase, that still waters run deep kind of thing. And I hadn't realized actually how talented you are as a musician until like a year and a half of, knowing you. Talk about kind of like your life as a singer-songwriter.
Yeah, well, first off, it's funny because when I was younger, I truly was quiet because I was shy and I wasn't sure if I opened my mouth and said something, if the idea would be received well. So back then, I didn't like being called quiet because I wanted to be somebody. And then after I got older and I had some time to run my mouth and see where that would get me in terms of making friends, I've come to value, again, the importance of just listening and soaking up knowledge, especially when I know that I'm in a place where people around me have a lot to say that I might not know so much about.
Yeah.
So, thank you. So with the whole singer-songwriter thing, I think it's something I don't talk about often because I think if I talk about something, sometimes it becomes really real. And if I say, I'm a singer-songwriter, that immediately kind of gives like a certain image that I'm not always sure I can maintain for everybody. And, there's professional writing, which I enjoy doing, and then there's very personal writing, which is personal. So I haven't really had much experience, sharing my songs. Well, that's not really true. I have. I've performed around San Jose.
Yeah.
San Jose is definitely the place where I've, started going to open mics and then doing performances and shows. But it gets awkward. I definitely had moments where I cried in performance, and it wasn't because I was, happy to be authentic or anything. It was because I was oh, shoot, these people are in the audience, and I've never talked to them about this part of me, and what are they going to think? And as soon as that idea gets into my head, I get nervous, and I start, low-key sobbing, and it's so awkward. And I always like to just play it off. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I'm living, I'm learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely the personal and the show, doing a show coming together, and it can be hard. It can be tricky sometimes still.
Yeah. Were you always into music, growing up, or is it something that kind of developed a little bit later?
I was always doing music. I was studying classical piano from the time I was 4 years old. And then in high school, I started to actually own the music in the sense that I began to write songs and I began to teach myself guitar. And that's, I think, the time that I was finding my voice and wanting to say things and using music as, the medium to say those things with.
Yeah, and so you're just recently, in 2020, you're releasing some music. So tell me about that and kind of what's going on with that.
Yeah, so when I was in school, I had all these songs that I was writing that I knew I wanted to release, and the people around me were encouraging me. They were like, "When are you going to put stuff out?" And I'm like, "Real soon, as soon as I figure out how." And then I was able to learn how. I took some recording classes, some YouTube videos on mixing and mastering, and I'm like, okay, I can do this. So by 2018, I had 9 songs that I planned to put in an album that was going to be called When We Cannot Boast.
Just to interrupt, because the audio kind of gets garbled. So it's called When We Cannot Boast, right? Boast?
Correct. When We Cannot Boast. B-O-A-S-T.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Continue.
And that's because most of these songs are actually about moments that I wasn't proud of myself when I was feeling low, and writing about it was a way to both capture the feelings that I had that felt very big and also kind of capture the lesson that I knew I was learning. So I had these collections of songs about moments I wasn't proud of myself. And I basically tried to mix and master everything myself. And then I had a friend that I was working with do the album art, and everything was ready. And then I kind of sat for a little bit, and I was like, is it really time to put this out in the world, or should I wait a little? And I was like, well, I'm busy graduating, getting a job, so I'll wait a little. So I waited. And then later on, I was like, I have some more money now, and I'm making income, and I can pay someone to make this better.
Yeah.
So I did that. I worked as a sound engineer, and I hired some great musicians and actually got to go into a recording studio and have that experience. It was amazing. And then I was waiting again because the sound engineer needed to get me those files, and we did some back and forth. Basically, it took me a year after recording to actually get those files. And as it happened, I got them on March 13th, which is last Friday.
Yeah.
And that's about the time that the shelter in place began. And so that's when I started, releasing my album in little parts.
Yeah. So then when did because right now you have two parts up. When did part 1 drop, and then when did part 2 drop?
That's a good question. I don't really know when they drop. It's literally just, it depends on, I upload it through my platform, which is DistroKid, and then they send it to the stores that I selected. And so I think it gets to Spotify in about a week and a half.
Okay.
So we've been, quietly releasing throughout March and early April, and I think that my last part of the album is probably going to land April 15th, 17th, maybe.
Yeah.
That's my best guess.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, I'm not really doing this in the way that they recommend. Usually they're like, hey, you're a new artist? Okay, release some really bomb singles first, and then self-promote, social media. But that stuff just, it freezes me. So I prefer to just email people that have, graciously shown their support and who say that they care. So
yeah. That's cool. Well, I mean, you don't want to boast, I guess, right?
I want to share. I very much mean that. I want to share these songs about moments I wasn't proud because I guess I'm glad, what they taught me.
Yeah.
And here I am now.
So is the process that you're releasing, you're doing 3 each time? Is that the kind of idea?
Yeah, it was kind of a nice split, 3 songs per album part, and then that creates my total of 9 songs. Yeah, and they all have a different sound, kind of, because some of them were professionally recorded and some of them were very DIY. But I don't know, that's part of the journey too. So I'm like, it's okay.
Yeah, well, the recording quality is like great. I mean, like I listened to it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so professional sounding because, like I said, I kind of, when I found out, and then even that one time we were doing the editing and we played your music in the background and stuff like that, I was really impressed. I hadn't really known how deep the waters really were flowing, and then I heard this new stuff and I was like, oh, this is really good. So
Wow.
yeah, it's exciting. I'm excited to listen to it more. Um, so
Thank you.
so tell me about the song "Meet an Alien." What's up with that?
Oh yeah. So Meet an Alien. It's it's a song that I wrote when I was feeling pretty upset. It was one of those moments when you feel like dramatically upset about yourself and the circumstances that you find yourself in. For me, that was basically just the aftermath of a breakup. Like, it was so simple. I found my ex-boyfriend dancing with another girl. Like, it was so cliche. But
Yeah,
I was just like, oh.
yeah,
And so I went home and I like opened a bottle of beer and just started to kind of lean into this fantasy that I could meet this otherworldly being that would like initiate me into their world, basically. And it was like life part 2. Like, you get another chance at being human with like different creatures, and you can redeem your past life here. And I know it's also dramatic, but the song itself isn't even like that. It's like a sweet little story
yeah,
about meeting an alien and trying to kiss the alien, but the alien's not a human, so you create more sparks and actual romance, but it's so great.
yeah,
And you're like, you know what, here, stay with me. You can have all of my friends, you can have all of my things, like share my bed, and like not like that, but like this, and it'll be great.
yeah, yeah. It is a fun sounding song. I didn't realize it was so much coming out of heartbreak. But heartbreak,
But I think that's,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Heartbreak is unfortunately or fortunately is a good source of creative material, right?
It's true, because when you're not feeling good, it feels like you have fewer options. Like, what can I do with myself? And so for me, that drives me to write and just spend time alone. Versus when I'm happy, I notice I tend to want to share that excitement, like outwardly.
Yeah,
So it doesn't always drive me to like sit by myself quietly.
yeah. So would you say like is it more difficult? Would you say in general and then personally to kind of like create from like good circumstances and happy circumstances than it is from more trying circumstances?
I love that question because I've been asking myself that because I am in a happier place now. Um, like, for example, well, I mean, I'm in an amazing relationship with a wonderful person,
You
and
found an
like,
alien.
yes, he found an alien, and
Yeah.
he's amazing. um, and so I've like tried to write things, and it's interesting because the songs themselves change with me. I mean, obviously. And at first, I was showing him some of my songs, and they weren't exactly love songs. Um, they weren't happy, and he was kind of like, "What? What does that mean?"
Right.
And I was like, "Well, it means that I guess my songwriting brain is still cautious, and I'm looking at this relationship with sort of a note of caution and seeing where I've come from and where this is now."
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, the songs are slowly changing. So like now, like, the most recent song I wrote was about this wonderful feeling after we've had a fight and we, I guess, make up. But I mean, just that peaceful feeling, and it's cool because I've never been able to write a song like that before because I don't think I really experienced it to that extent. So
Yeah. 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 That's good.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Um, so with this kind of like current shelter in place and stuff like that, is there anything that you've been kind of like learning about yourself or experiencing that during this time?
Yeah, I feel like all the little parts of me that were kind of sleeping, I'm like waking them up because I have time to. So earlier I mentioned that I was studying classical piano when I was younger, and so I'm leaning back into that. I'm currently memorizing a Chopin piece. It's this
Oh,
popular one. It's Nocturne 2, Opus 9. It's that famous one that goes like da 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 Da, 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 that one.
Yeah, yeah.
And I live in a place where there's a lot of Spanish speakers around me, so I've been learning Spanish, and I've also been practicing my Cantonese and Mandarin.
Wow.
And so it feels good. I'm trying to, yeah. I mean, of course, I also have days where I just, like, sit on my butt, like, reading and, like, searching the internet, which is also great. I don't feel bad for that because, like, what else should I be doing, you know?
Yeah. So, yeah, what's some of the things that you've kind of experienced or maybe you have grown or learned as being a part of Content Magazine? This is where I'm promoting the magazine.
Perfect. I love talking about content, and I really mean it. Because it does, like, the things that I think make me feel most alive. So when I get to sit down with a creative, you know, someone who's passionate about something and has really worked on it, you know, and I don't even know this person yet, it's so cool. It's kind of like a platonic blind date where I just get to learn about this person and what drives them and the sort of philosophies that they, like, keep in their heart. And, you know, and I get an hour of that. That's always, like, life-giving. I don't mean to be over-the-top dramatic, but it is for me.
Yeah.
And then I am a writer, so I do enjoy kind of trying to craft a story out of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then the pickup party is awesome because then it's like, hey, we get to celebrate what you do and, like, introduce you to other people who do this too. And I'm like, come on, like, I feel like every city needs something like that because without it, we're all weirdly disconnected and separated by traffic and long train rides, although I love train rides. And it just, you know, it kind of kills what I think we need to be doing, which is knowing the people who are, like, near us, like, physically near us.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, I've found that too, is like starting to do the magazine, just being able to meet different people. Like, I'm inspired by their story, you know, and their creative process and what they've been going through in their journey. And even though it may be stuff that I already have learned or whatever, it just, I don't know, it inspires, right?
Yeah. And it's like, you know, doing profile after profile, you start to see, like, the connections, the common themes that kind of run through each story that inspires. And, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. For you, how would you say, like, you approach, you know, like, your creative process of writing a song or putting a song together? What's some of the things that you do to kind of, you know, get that discipline going?
Well, I would say that usually it starts with the feelings.
Yeah.
But if you're not so lucky as to be drowning in feelings, then something else I do is I kind of just write my thoughts out, kind of like, you know, those fridge magnets where there's like little phrases,
Yeah.
kind of like that. Sometimes lines come together like that. And, you know, when I revisit those lines, like, I add a little more, and then it kind of starts to mean something. Like, the story starts to come out. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I can go back and revise some more. And usually I write the music at the same time, so that also evolves along as I go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then how about the writing process? What do you think for a story or to doing a profile, like for content? What do you think is some of the things that are kind of like need to be in there in order to communicate something?
I kind of feel like usually, like, by the end of an interview, you know, there are certain golden moments that I've picked up on that I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to be in the story. And I either make a note of it or I ask the person at the end of the interview, like, okay, so if there's one thing you want to make sure, like, people know about you, what is it? And that kind of, like, will be leading the story. But other than that, I transcribe the interview. I know it sounds tedious, but I actually don't mind doing it. I actually type really fast, so it's not a problem for me.
Yeah.
And then I kind of get the timeline down, and then I kind of just, you know, start writing out what happened, and then there's, like, an intro and an ending that is, like, Steve's own special time and care. But I don't know. I feel like it's kind of coming together, and it's kind of like, I'm not a sculptor, but it's like you have all this text and then going back and slowly, like, taking out the excessive details or the things I said 3 times in 5 different ways, you know.
Yeah.
That's actually the fun part when you have something to work with. Usually starting is the hardest part, but I think that's true across all disciplines.
Yeah. The blank sheet of paper is always the loudest thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just being able to whittle down the ideas, right? You might have a conversation with somebody and there's about 15 different great themes to explore, right? And just trying to figure out, okay, in this limited time and space, which is the one to focus on, right?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes there's like multiple quotes, multiple ideas, and I'm like, I don't have space to, really draw out each one. And also with content profiles, every once in a while, I feel like I haven't really quite done that person justice in terms of figuring out their story the way that I guess I want it to sound. And in those cases, I'm really glad that we can also use like a Q&A format, because sometimes I'm like, screw this. Like, my writing isn't doing a good enough job. I'm just going to have this person like tell their story in their own words. And in those cases, transcribing is so useful, because then I just kind of cut and paste, and it's like they told the story themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that is I'm not a writer, nor do I enjoy writing. So when I do it, I usually just do the Q&A, just because, trying to weave a conversation into a story, like in a narrative, is so difficult. And then a lot of times I'm like, well, they said this was so good. Oh, they said this is so good. I don't want to leave anything out,
Yeah. And what's more is, like, sometimes, it feels like my own voice can get in the way of what's actually being said. And so when that happens, I'm like, okay, I need to stop. Like, I'm just going to look at the quotes, look at the interview again, and, like, find the story from that again.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get in the way.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you being involved. As a writer and a musician, what have you read lately, or what would you recommend?
Yes. Okay. So I have never been big on, like, Silicon Valley startup stuff, but this reporter named Sarah Fryer released a book called No Filter, The Inside Story of Instagram.
Oh,
and, actually, we were going to have her come and do a special event at our facility at my workplace, but that obviously got canceled. But I love this because she's a great writer. It's very clear, but you get to see the people behind Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat. And I don't know, I feel like it was a really good introduction for me to that whole scene.
Yeah.
So that's recommended. And okay, I am rereading the book The Time Traveler's Life, because I'm obsessed with the idea of time travel.
Oh, cool.
And I have been reading this book since I was 8 years old, which means that obviously I didn't understand half of it when I first read it. But I love that book.
Yeah, that's cool. And then as a musician, what is it? What's on your Spotify right now?
Okay, give me a second, because yesterday I was sifting through my songwriter playlist and trying to consolidate everything.
So you have a playlist that you kind of put together that, like, where you're appreciating the songwriting as a songwriter. You're like, oh yeah, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I actually have multiple playlists like that, though. So it's like I have 6 songwriter playlists, depending on who the songwriter seems to be talking to.
Oh.
So I have one called Songwriter, Ask God. Songwriter, Ask Specific Human with Intimate.
That's cool. Yeah. That's cool. Actually, I never even thought about, like, how, songs do have different, like, they're writing it to a different person like this. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So then what was the one that you found just recently that you've been listening to or been inspired by?
Well, I think Margaret Glaspie, she released an album named Devotion, and her songs get stuck in my head. So there's one. I would say Fiona Apple.
Oh, really?
Is like a classic that I'm consistently always playing, because she's wonderful and I love the way she writes. Sufjan Stevens.
Oh, really?
Also a popular one, but always good to come back to.
Yeah.
And he's quite, a composer as well. A lot of his non-lyrical stuff is just as, like, dynamic and colorful and interesting.
So then, last thing, I think what we'll do is, I want to thank you for being a part of this, but I think what we'll do is we will play out of your interview with one of your songs. Which one would you like to have be kind of like the extra to your interview, and why?
I would like to play A Pound of Me.
Awesome.
And that one, because it was one of the first songs I wrote when I started college, and it was one of those songs where at first I was just writing down lines that came into my head. I didn't know what they meant, but years later I'm like, I know exactly what I'm saying. I'm talking about how at first everything is magical, when you're younger, and you started college, everything is great, and then you start to see the cracks. You start to look out a window and realize, oh, this window is framing a much larger picture and it's complicated, or oh, there is a ceiling and it's made of glass and I have to get through it, and other people have even more glass ceilings to get through, and it's just about the illusion breaking and how it can be hard. But
so thank you for being a part of this. I really appreciate you helping out with content, and also I really appreciate your music. So thank you very much, Esther.
My name is Esther Young, and this is my song, A Pound of Me. You don't know what I'm ever thinking, though the poets of the cemetery.
This episode's music is by Esther Young. You can find her on Spotify.